The TDA, developing people, improving young lives.
History teachers have to teach a range of historical skills, including interpretation, and a lot of them find it hard to teach.
It is intellectually challenging, there's no doubt about it. It's also very much the sort of dealing with an adult world in the sense of they have to grasp two time periods, the period that's being studied, but also the period in which the interpretation was created.
Most history teachers integrate skills like source analysis and chronology into their topics. Ben argues that interpretations also need to be contextualised and woven into the fabric of lessons to help pupils develop this difficult skill. Today, he'll work with Esther Arnott, a second-year teacher, to discuss interpretation and help weave it into her lesson on Henry II and Becket.
Right, well, we're here to look at interpretations. Yes, your heart sank then, didn't it? It's one of those areas where it's extremely important, and it's too important to leave out.
It's very dependent on them understanding vast swathe of history, because that's so difficult. And so it's almost like we need to teach all of the history and then to do the interpretations on top, and you can't possibly expect a year 7 to know 700 years of history and then go, oh, and that's why maybe you can link these in and slot these into those different time zones or those different groups of people or whatever. And so it's a really, it's such a big ask.
It's so counterintuitive to a lot of what happens in school generally, and indeed a lot of what happens in history, which is, you know, searching for the truth, looking for the right answer, or even unpicking the original source material to see what meanings lie in there. Whereas with interpretation, it's very much about I mean, it's almost literary, isn't it?
It's certainly for my year 7s who I've got to teach Henry and Becket to. I'm trying to sort of think, well, how do I do that one? Because traditionally it's the sources, you know, the paper and the pictures and everything, and it's great, but I want to make it much more sort of living and breathing to them.
I've done some work on this with year 7s before, and what I was trying to get them to see was to uncover the story of Becket generally has unfolded in one direction, favourably towards him, and actually that's not an accident. I think, and until we switch on their interpretation antenna, the natural tendency of young students is to assume that, well, if that's what everybody thinks, that's probably what happened. I had my own Trafalgar moment not so long ago when I was watching a documentary on TV with a historian sort of putting forward his particular view, and he made a point which I thought was very interesting, that this king, Henry II, ought to have the same reputation, the same high-level reputation as Elizabeth I or Henry VIII or Winston Churchill, and yet he doesn't. And it just struck me at that point that actually reputation is actually arguably one of, if not the most accessible form of interpretation. You know, most year 7s know somebody with a reputation, even if it's pretty unsavoury, or indeed have their own reputation. So do you think that would work for...
I can almost see this idea of starting with reputations as a lesson and almost taking people in the class and sort of unpacking why they have different, people interpret them in different ways. Why does that teacher say this? Why does that pupil say this? And almost starting with a mini focus on themselves.
So actually that's not a bad place to start, is it? With actually just getting to grips with the very concept of reputations.
There's a big word up here. Now this word says reputation. Who on earth thinks they know what reputation means? Vishal, what does reputation mean?
How they've said their manner or the way they do things and stuff like that.
Yeah, the way they do things. Would you judge your own reputation, or does someone else tell you? Someone else tells you what your reputation is. Okay, the 4 groups are up on the board there. What do you think your reputation is among those different groups of people? Have a go. How many reputations have you got, do you think?
My friends think I'm good at rugby. My teachers think I'm smart, and my rugby coach thinks I'm a good player.
And I've been hearing that some of you have maybe 4 different reputations. How can you have 4 different reputations, Zach?
Because each of those people see a different side of you.
In the year 2000, do you think your teachers or your mum or your dad or any of these people that we've looked at, do you think they thought about you in a different way?
With my mum and my dad and my teachers, I used to be like really shy and I wouldn't say anything, but now I can't stop talking.
Like my grandparents, now that I'm older, they think I'm a bit more mature, but when I was smaller, they probably thought I was cute.
Ah, okay, so some of you, your reputation has changed over time. When we look at people's reputations, it depends on who you ask and when you ask them. In history, if we're really smart, we call those opinions interpretations.
Would you envisage breaking this down into sort of distinct elements that constitute or build up a reputation, so that almost each lesson would then be unpacking one of those elements, or would you suggest that it was more a I can't think how it, whether it grows organically or whether it is sort of like a logical path, or does that fly in the face of what interpretations are, which is not logical?
Yeah, I think it's a nice idea, but I suspect that neat packages like that, you often find that big lumps of content come along and don't fit, and then you have to sort of try and either jiggle them into the framework, or you just have to abandon the framework. Personally, I'm always in favour of actually letting the story unfold as far as you can, and then actually sort of seeing where these concepts that we're trying to pick up on actually fit from this. And then Henry comes in. So rather than actually start with Beckett, you actually start with Henry.
Yes.
You come in with Great Britain's, the great kings and queens. You'd give them 5 to vote for.
And you could stick Henry II in there, normal vote, because who's he?
They won't know anything about him.
Which of these kings and queens have a reputation for doing something important? Who's going to vote for Henry VIII? Okay, it's very popular. Can I have votes for William the Conqueror, please? Good old William the Conqueror. He's got some supporters here today. We've got 2, 3 for Willie. Well done. What about Henry II? Are you sure about this? No one is voting for Henry. This man should have a reputation for being a great king. You should all know about him.
And then you come in with, I suppose, a kind of profile of Henry.
Yes.
So you could actually sort of build up sort of maybe his personal qualities. His energy, his education, his intelligence, his sort of warmth and all that sort of thing.
We need to work out a little bit about this guy, Henry. What kind of king is this?
It also said that he's harsh to his servants, generous in public, thrifty in private. So it's like he has different reputations to what other people think of him.
Interesting. Okay, so some people will say different things of this man. That's excellent. Well done. Zach, tell me something.
He's serious at being a king, because if he shows too much niceness to his peasants or people, they'll think he's a really nice king and try to take advantage of him. So he takes his job seriously.
And then I guess that would take us to sort of the next stage, which would be letting them in on the fact that he hasn't got this stellar reputation.
So why is Henry not more famous? The answer as to why Henry does not have a really amazing reputation is because of Thomas Becket and something that happened. Does anyone know what it is?
Is it that after Henry died, Thomas Becket covered up what he did?
Not quite. Good idea, but not quite.
Is it because he tried taking over?
Henry tried taking over power. There is definitely something to do with power. Well done, Jerry.
The traditional explanation for this sort of lack of reputation of Henry II is the clash with Becket. And it might be quite interesting to just try and give them a fairly flat, straight A to B sort of thing. For example, there is some early film material. There is absolutely no doubt about who the good guy is and who the bad guy is. And you could maybe actually use material like that as the story, so to speak. And then, of course, revisit it and ask the students, hang on, are you spotting anything here?
Has the filmmaker got a reason to show Henry in a certain way?
Yes.
Because
like they'll think he's a good guy, but when they see this, it will make them think, I didn't know that.
So that's going to make them say to their friends
that you should go see this film because like it's an unexpected twist.
Whenever I teach a lesson, I always divide my outcomes into two, concrete and conceptual.
Yes.
Yeah, and my ideal conceptual outcome here would be an understanding that who writes the history or who marshals the facts is every bit as important as the facts that are being marshalled.
Yeah.
Yeah. So authorship is extremely important. That's the bottom line. Very often, younger students, if they get the idea of alternative interpretations, they usually sort of work on the basis that the historian is honest, and therefore, if a new interpretation comes along, it must be because new evidence has appeared. That first historian didn't get it quite right because he or she didn't know about this piece of information. And it's actually a huge conceptual leap, I think, to say, well, that might be the case, but it might also be the case simply that this historian had an idea and wrote the history in that way, whereas this historian saw the world very differently.
Ever heard of the idea of authorship? This idea of an author has a reason when he writes or makes a film. What's the point of having a film?
Because people will have different opinions on whether he's a good guy or a bad guy.
Excellent. So why does a filmmaker focus not on any of Henry's good stuff?
Because he wants people to think the way he thinks on his opinion.
Good, so he's trying to convince us of his opinion.
I think what I would be looking at is something that sets up what Henry's reputation is now, or the great puzzle of why it isn't as great as it might be. And if this happened yesterday, how might the story be told?
Oh yeah.
So if
that's interesting. So that links back to our discussion where we say why it's important for interpretations, which is not taking everything you see at face value. And so this could have been made yesterday, could have been made 1,000 years ago.
And that gives us a number of sort of big elements as to how Henry got that reputation. That would allow us to get into some interesting things like Canterbury Tales, and you know, you could sort of say 200 years later, people are still coming to the shrine. So reputations depend on who you ask and when you ask them. Okay, well done. I'm very, very pleased. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye. Thank you. It's one of those lessons where you get to the end and go, yes, they were with me, they did it, and we got through it together. And I felt like I was learning a lot from them about how students understand and approach the difficult topic of interpretations. There's no doubt that this needs to be sort of centred in a series of lessons. You're not going to achieve a good understanding of interpretations on any subject in just one lesson. Really, you need to be thinking in terms of schemes of work and even indeed linking units across a given year and between years as well throughout the whole of the Key Stage 3 scheme.